What would you do if, at 73 years old, you discovered that the person you trusted most in the world was secretly plotting your death? Imagine finding out your own son had stolen thousands from you, opened secret accounts, and taken out a $500,000 life insurance policy, betting on your death. Sounds like fiction, right? Well, this isn't fiction. This is my life. My name is Beatrice Caldwell, and today I'm going to reveal how I uncovered a sinister family plot, took a stand against betrayal, and fought for justice at an age most people are ready to give up. Watch until the end, because sometimes the real threat isn't hiding in the shadows outside. It's sitting at your own table, smiling, waiting for you to die. At 70, I thought I knew all the secrets a life could hold. My name is Beatrice Caldwell, and for over 5 decades, this farm in the heart of Harmony Creek, Missouri, was my universe. The hands that now tremble slightly as I hold my coffee cup were the same ones that milked cows before dawn, planted seeds in spring, and harvested the fruits of an honest life alongside my dear George. George passed away 9 years ago, leaving a void that all the work in the world couldn't fill. But he also left this land, this house, and the memories of a life built brick by brick, fence by fence. Harmony Creek is the kind of place where everyone knows everyone's story, where doors are never locked, and where a man's word is worth more than any contract. That's why, when my son Robert and his wife Brenda offered to handle my finances after George's death, I accepted without hesitation. "Mom, you've worked your whole life. Let us take care of this boring paperwork for you," Rob said, with that wide smile that always melted my heart. They lived in the city, just 20 minutes away, and came religiously every Sunday for lunch. Rob was all I had, my only son, my blood, my continuity in this world. Routine became my anchor after George left. I wake up every day at 5 in the morning, make my strong coffee, and sit on the porch to watch the world awaken. It's my sacred moment, when I mentally converse with George, when I give thanks for another day. I tend to my small herb garden, check the chicken coop, and prepare simple, yet hearty meals. Afternoons are for reading, knitting, or a visit to Mrs. Henderson, my 82-year-old neighbor who still makes me feel young. That Monday in October, however, something disturbed the harmony of my morning. The mailman, Mr. Wilson, brought the mail as usual, but there was something different among the usual bills. A white envelope, no return address, with my name typewritten on the front. Not handwritten, as Rob always did when he sent me something. Typewritten, cold, impersonal. My hands, which had learned to be steady in 70 years of life, trembled as I opened the envelope. It was a bank statement, not my monthly statement, which Rob always brought and carefully explained. It was from an account I didn't recognize, an account in my name, but one I had never opened. The numbers danced before my eyes for a moment. Then they organized themselves into a reality that cut me like a razor. A transaction of $50,000 had been transferred from that account to another 3 days earlier. $50,000, an amount I had never seen in my life, much less moved. My heart began to pound erratically. I tried to breathe deeply, as George taught me when anxiety overwhelmed me after my mother's death. "B," he used to say, "when the world gets confusing, breathe. Clarity always comes after calm." But this time, calm didn't come. I picked up the phone and called Rob. He answered on the 3rd ring, his voice sounding strangely tense. "Hi, Mom. Everything okay?" "Rob, dear, I need to talk to you about something. Can you come here today?" There was a pause, too long. "Today?" "Oh, Mom, today's a bit difficult. I have an important meeting. How about we talk on Sunday at lunch?" "It's about a bank statement, Rob, from an account I don't know." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Then his voice, when it returned, had a different tone, colder. "Mom, you're worrying for nothing. It must be some bank error. These things happen. Relax, we'll sort it out on Sunday." He hung up quickly, leaving me there, in the kitchen, with the statement in my hands and a cold feeling in my stomach. Rob had never treated me this way. He had never dismissed me with such coldness. I looked at the paper again. The numbers were still there, indelible, accusing. Something was very wrong, and for the first time in 9 years since George left, I felt truly alone. The October wind blew through the open windows, bringing with it the smell of dry leaves and the promise of a harsh winter. But there was something else in the air, a tension I couldn't name, a premonition that made me shiver. I folded the statement carefully and put it in the back of my bedroom dresser drawer, under the lace handkerchiefs my mother left me. That piece of paper, so small and innocent, had cracked the foundation of my trust. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stayed on the porch late, looking at the stars, trying to find answers the sky didn't give me. George always said that truth is like water. It always finds a way to surface. I was about to discover how deep the waters ran beneath the apparent tranquility of my life. What I didn't know was that that envelope wasn't a mistake. It was a warning. And in the coming days, I would discover that the person I trusted most in the world was about to teach me the most painful lesson of my entire life. Sunday arrived, dragging with it an anxiety I had never felt. I prepared the usual roast, set the table with the dinnerware set I received as a wedding gift, but my hands trembled as I cut the vegetables. The bank statement burned in my bedroom drawer like a secret begging to be screamed. Rob and Brenda arrived promptly at noon, as always. He brought flowers from the market, daisies my favorite, and she carried her famous apple pie. Everything perfectly normal, except for Rob's eyes, which avoided mine, and Brenda's forced smile, which seemed to have been glued to her face. "How was your week, Mom?" Rob asked, kissing my forehead with cold lips. "Interesting," I replied, watching his reaction. "I received some unusual mail." Brenda dropped her fork on the plate with a metallic clatter that echoed through the dining room. "What kind of mail?" she asked, her voice sounding an octave higher than normal. I retrieved the statement and placed it on the table, between the roast and the bowl of mashed potatoes. The white paper contrasted with the floral tablecloth, but it was the printed numbers that truly caught attention. Rob looked at the document, and his face lost all color. Brenda choked on her wine and began to cough violently. "What is this, Mom?" Rob asked, but his voice betrayed the fact that he knew exactly what it was. "It's a statement from an account in my name. An account I didn't open, with transactions I didn't authorize. Can you explain yourselves?" Brenda recovered first, wiping her mouth with her napkin. Dear, this must be a mistake. You know how messy banks are these days. Someone probably typed your name by mistake." "A mistake?" I repeated, my voice gaining strength. "Is a $50,000 transaction a mistake?" Rob finally found his voice. "Mom, you've been forgetting some things lately. It's normal, with age. Maybe you opened this account and don't remember. Or maybe it's an investment we made for you and explained, but you forgot." Those words hit me like a slap. "Forgot? You think I forgot moving $50,000? That's not what we're saying," Brenda interjected, her voice as sweet as poisoned honey. "It's just that sometimes, as we get older, our memory, well, you understand." I stood up from the table, anger boiling in my chest. My memory is perfect, and I remember every penny I've spent in the last 70 years. So I'll ask one more time, what is this account? Rob and Brenda exchanged a meaningful glance. It was the kind of look a husband and wife exchange when they're planning a lie. I had seen George and me do that when we hid Christmas presents from Rob when he was a child. But this was different. This was sinister. "All right," Rob sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "It's a savings account we opened for you. For your retirement. To ensure you have money if anything happens." "And why didn't I know about this account? And why didn't I know about this account?" "Because you always get nervous about these financial things," Brenda explained. "Remember how stressed you were when we had to deal with George's inventory? We just wanted to spare you those worries." The words sounded logical, but something in their tone of voice, something in the way they avoided my eyes, told me there was much more to the story. And where did those $50,000 go? Another glance between them, another moment of hesitation. Too long. "Investments," Rob said quickly. "We put it into a fund that will give a better return. It's all for your own good, Mom." I had known Rob his whole life, and Brenda for 20 years. I knew when they were lying, and they were lying shamelessly. "I want to see all the documents for this account. I want to understand where my money is. I want to see all the documents for this account. I want to understand where my money is." "Of course, Mom. Next week we'll bring everything organized for you," Rob said, getting up to hug me. But the hug was mechanical, without warmth. They left earlier than usual, claiming commitments in the city. I watched them from the window, getting into Rob's new car, a black sedan he hadn't had 2 months ago. Where had the money for a new car come from? When the red lights disappeared down the dusty road, a determination I hadn't felt in years took hold of me. They were hiding something big, and I was going to find out what. On Monday morning, I decided to investigate on my own. Rob and Brenda had improvised a small office in the barn where George used to keep his tools. They said it was to organize the farm's papers, but I had never paid much attention. The door was locked, which was strange. Rob was always careless with keys. I searched the old keyring George kept on the kitchen hook and found a rusty one that fit perfectly. Even in death, George was helping me. The office was too organized, labeled files, colored folders, all very professional for someone who claimed to be just helping with paperwork. I began to examine the documents, and with each opened folder, my horror grew. There were loan agreements in my name that I had never signed, statements from multiple bank accounts, all in my name, all with transactions I didn't know about. And then, at the bottom of a locked drawer that I managed to open with a hairpin, I found the folder that made my blood run cold. Insurance documents, Beatrice Caldwell, was written on the label. Insurance documents, Beatrice Caldwell was written on the label. Inside, a life insurance policy, in my name, with a value of $500,000. The beneficiaries were Robert Miller and Brenda Hayes. The policy date was just 6 months after George's death. My hands trembled so much I almost dropped the document. They weren't just stealing my money. They were speculating on my death, waiting, perhaps even planning, for me to pass away so they could profit. The sound of a car on the road made me panic. Quickly, I put everything back in place and locked the drawer. I left the barn and ran to the house, my heart pounding like a war drum. It was the mailman, just Mr. Wilson, with the Daily Mail. But paranoia had set in. If they found out I was investigating. That night, sitting on the porch with a cup of cold tea in my hands, I tried to process what I had discovered. My son, the boy I had loved and raised, was systematically robbing me. And more than that, he was profiting from the expectation of my death. The pain was physical, as if someone had ripped a piece from my chest. But along with the pain came something I hadn't felt in a long time, a cold, determined fury. They had underestimated Beatrice Caldwell, and that was the biggest mistake they had ever made. I couldn't sleep for 2 nights in a row. The image of the life insurance policy burned behind my eyelids like a red-hot iron. $500,000. That's what they thought my death was worth. The cold reality of that discovery had transformed my pain into an iron determination. On Tuesday morning, Rob showed up at the farm without warning. This never happened. He always called before coming, always respected my routine. But there he was, at 9 in the morning, with a brown envelope in his hands and an expression I had never seen before. "Mom, I brought the documents you asked for," he said, entering the kitchen without waiting for an invitation. His voice sounded different, colder, more calculating. "Good," I replied, keeping my voice steady despite the internal turmoil. "We can sit at the table to talk." He spread some papers on the table, but they were generic documents, superficial statements, nothing that truly explained where my money was. It was clearly a charade. "See? It's all here. Investments, applications, everything in order. You don't have to worry about anything." I looked at the papers, then at my son. "Rob, tell me something. How much longer do you think I have to live?" The question caught him off guard. He blinked several times as if processing a computer error. "What kind of question is that, Mom? You're in good health." "Am I? Because I have the impression you're counting on something different." His eyes narrowed. The mask was starting to slip. "I don't understand what you're getting at." I stood up and walked towards him, stopping very close. I wanted to see every micro-expression, every tremor that might reveal the truth. "I'm getting at the life insurance policy you took out in my name. I'm getting at the loans you took out using my farm as collateral. I'm getting at the plan you and Brenda have to get rid of me." Rob's face transformed. The mask of a loving son completely disappeared, revealing something that made me instinctively recoil. His eyes were cold, calculating, almost predatory. "How did you—" he began, then controlled himself. "Mom, you're delusional. That's not real." "How did you—" he began, then controlled himself. "Mom, you're delusional. That's not real." "Not real?" "I saw the documents, Rob. I was in the barn office. I know everything." For a moment, the silence was absolute. Then Rob laughed. It was a terrible sound, humorless, inhuman. It was the laugh of a stranger. You shouldn't have done that, Mom. Shouldn't have found out that my own son is robbing me? That he's speculating on my death? He stood up abruptly, knocking over the chair. Speculating? Mom, you're 70 years old. You're not going to live forever. Someone has to be practical here. The words hit me like punches. Practical? Is that what you call robbing your own mother? Robbing? Rob shouted, his voice echoing through the kitchen. I'm taking care of your future. I'm ensuring you have a dignified old age. I'm doing what you never had the competence to do. Liar, you're stealing my money to pay your debts. I saw the bills for your new car, the credit card expenses. Rob approached me, and for the first time in my life, I felt afraid of my own son. Listen carefully, Mom. You're getting old. You're getting confused. Soon, you won't be able to take care of this farm anymore. What do you think will happen then? I'll decide what to do with my own life. Will you? He laughed again. Who's going to believe you? A senile old woman against her own son who only wants what's best for her? Do you think anyone will take you seriously? His words were like knives, cutting not only my trust, but my identity. He was trying to convince me that I was exactly what he needed me to be, a confused, incapable old woman. I'm not senile, Robert. I'm not senile, Robert. No? Then why did you forget where you put the farm deeds? Why can't you operate the computer I bought for you anymore? Why do you get confused with the accounts? Each question was a lie, but built on small truths. I had indeed asked for help with the computer. I did sometimes get confused with more complex accounts. He was taking my natural vulnerability of age and turning it into a weapon against me. Because you never gave me a chance to learn. Because you always said you'd take care of everything. And I am taking care of it. I'm making sure that when you can no longer make decisions, everything is protected. Protected for whom, Rob? For me or for you? He fell silent, but the expression on his face told me everything. It wasn't protection. It was appropriation. He fell silent, but the expression on his face told me everything. It wasn't protection. It was appropriation. The kitchen door opened and Brenda entered, as if she had been waiting outside. She carried a folder of documents and had an expression I recognized immediately. It was the face of someone coming to deliver the final blow. "B," she said, her voice artificially sweet. "We brought some papers for you to sign. They're just formalities to put everything in order." What kind of formalities? Rob and Brenda exchanged a look, and I saw the silent decision passing between them. They had decided to drop the charade. "They are property transfer documents," Rob said, his voice now completely cold. "For your own good, to ensure you receive proper care." "Transfer to where?" "To us, temporarily," Brenda explained. "Just until you, until you no longer need to worry about these things." The coldness in the words, "until you no longer need to worry," made me understand everything. They weren't just planning my incapacity, they were planning my death. And they had the audacity to make it sound like charity. "I will never sign this." Rob moved closer, his presence now openly threatening. "Mom, you have no choice. Because if you don't sign, we'll have to take more drastic measures. You are clearly no longer competent to make decisions. Perhaps it's time to consider a medical evaluation. Perhaps a place where you can receive proper care. Are you threatening me?" "I'm protecting you," he said, but the smile that accompanied the words was pure venom. "From yourself." I looked at my son, at the woman I had considered a daughter, and saw strangers, predators. They had coldly calculated how to strip me of everything I had, including my dignity, my independence, and, if necessary, my life. But they had made a fatal mistake. They assumed I would passively surrender, that I would accept. That the Beatrice Caldwell who had survived decades of hard work, who had raised a son alone after her husband's premature death, who had built a life with her own hands, would simply give up. "Get out of my house," I said, my voice low, but filled with an authority that made them recoil. "Mom, get out of my house." They left, but Rob stopped at the door. "You have 24 hours to reconsider, Mom. After that, we'll have to take the necessary measures, for your own good." When I heard the car leave, I collapsed into the kitchen chair. The tears finally came, not from sadness, but from a rage so deep it seemed to come from my bones. They had underestimated me, and now I was going to show them exactly who they were dealing with. War had been declared, and Beatrice Caldwell had no intention of losing. War had been declared, and Beatrice Caldwell had no intention of losing. The night was the longest of my life. Every sound in the house startled me. Every creak of the wood made me jump out of bed. Rob's words echoed in my mind. We'll have to take the necessary measures. What exactly did that mean? On Wednesday morning, I found out. I tried to call my friend Martha Henderson, but the line was dead. I went to check the kitchen phone. Also no signal. They had cut my communication lines. Isolation was part of the strategy. I had read about it in a magazine in the doctor's waiting room, how abusers isolate their victims, cutting off their connections to the outside world. But reading about it and living that reality are two completely different things. I walked to Martha's house, but she wasn't there. I tried Mrs. Peterson, but she received me with unusual coldness. Sorry, B, but I'm very busy today. The door closed in my face. They had gotten there before me, spreading their lies, planting seeds of doubt about my sanity. I returned home feeling more alone than ever. But then I remembered something I had kept months ago, a brochure I found at the bank about elder rights. At the time, I had picked it up out of curiosity. Now it seemed like a lifeline. On the back of the brochure, there was a phone number, Elder Support Center, 24H emergency line. The problem was that my phones didn't work, but I remembered the old cell phone Rob had given me the year before. For emergencies, he had said. How ironic. The emergency was himself. I found the device in the dresser drawer, covered in dust. The battery was low, but it worked. With trembling hands, I dialed the number. It rang once, twice. On the third, a young, warm voice answered. Elder Support Center, Grace O'Connell speaking. How can I help? For a moment, I couldn't speak. It was like hearing an angel's voice. Ma'am, are you there? Grace asked gently. Yes, I am. My name is Beatrice Caldwell. I need help. Beatrice, are you safe now? That simple question broke down the last barriers of my resistance. Tears began to flow. I don't know anymore. I don't think so. Can you tell me what's happening? And then, for the first time in days, I spoke. I told her everything. The mysterious statement, the discovery in the barn, the insurance policy, Rob's threats, the forced isolation. Grace listened without interrupting, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When I finished, Grace sighed deeply. Beatrice, what you are describing is a severe form of elder financial and psychological abuse. Unfortunately, when the abuser is a family member, it becomes even more complex to resolve. No one will believe me, will they? I asked, echoing Rob's cruel words. I believe you, Grace said firmly. And it's not the first time I've heard a story like this. I'm a lawyer. I work pro bono for the center, and our specialty is exactly this type of case. Those words, I believe you, were like water to a person dying of thirst. Someone was finally listening to me without judging me, without thinking I was confused or senile. What can I do? First, we need to ensure your safety. Second, we need to collect evidence. You said you saw documents in the barn? I did, but they might have moved everything after they found out I was there. I did, but they might have moved everything after they found out I was there. Let's hope they were careless. Beatrice, do you feel capable of going back there and photographing the documents with your cell phone? I know it sounds complicated, but I can try, I interrupted. The idea of using my cell phone to photograph documents had never occurred to me, but necessity was forcing me to learn. Grace patiently explained how to use the phone's camera, how to save the photos. It was simpler than I imagined. You need to be careful, Beatrice. If they find out you're collecting evidence, what are they going to do? Kill me? The silence on the other end of the line was answer enough. Beatrice, I want you to know that you are no longer alone. I'm going to give you my direct number. Anything, anytime, you call me, and we're going to start building a case against them. I hung up the phone with a feeling I hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. I had an ally. More than that, I had an expert who understood exactly what was happening to me. On Thursday morning, I saw Rob and Brenda leaving in their car for the city. It was my chance. I ran to the barn with my cell phone in hand, my heart pounding like a war drum. To my relief, the documents were still there. They had been too arrogant to believe I would dare to return. I photographed everything: the insurance policy, the falsified loan agreements, the statements from accounts I didn't know about. And then, in the last drawer, I found something that made my blood run cold. It was a detailed plan, not just to steal my money, but to sell the entire farm. There were property maps, land appraisals, and even blueprints for subdividing everything into smaller lots. At the end of the document, a timeline, and the final date was November 15th, just 3 weeks away. But what shocked me most was a handwritten note from Brenda in the margin. After health incident, immediate transfer to specialized care. Health incident. They were planning an incident. I photographed everything with trembling fingers and ran back to the house. I immediately called Grace. Grace, I found something terrible. They're not just stealing, they're planning. Calm down, Beatrice. Breathe. Tell me slowly. I told her about the subdivision plan, about the timeline, about Brenda's note. Grace was silent for a long moment. Beatrice, I need you to send me these photos now. And then, I need you to do exactly what I'm going to tell you. Your life may depend on it. The next few hours were a blur of technical instructions, phone numbers, and a preparation I never imagined I would need to do. Grace explained how to send the photos by email using the cell phone, how to create a secure account, how to delete the history. Beatrice, you did an amazing job. This evidence is devastating. But now comes the most dangerous part. What do you mean? They're going to accelerate their plans when they realize you're resisting. You need to be prepared for anything. That night, sitting on the porch with a cup of cold tea, I looked at the stars and thought of George. What would you do, my love? I whispered to the wind. The answer came as if he were right beside me. Fight, Bee. Fight to the end. And that's exactly what I was planning to do. The student had become the teacher. The victim was transforming into a warrior. And Robert Miller and Brenda Hayes were about to discover that they had messed with the wrong woman. The battle was just beginning. But now, for the first time, I felt I had a chance to win. If someone had told me a month ago that I would be acting like a spy, secretly photographing documents and using codes to communicate with a lawyer, I would have laughed. But necessity transforms people in unimaginable ways. And I, Beatrice Caldwell, at 73, was discovering abilities I never knew I possessed. Grace had taught me how to create a temporary email, something she called a secure account. The username was Prairie Owl 47, a reference to the owl that lived in the oak tree behind the house and that George always said reminded him of me, silent, but always watching everything. The photos I sent to Grace caused exactly the reaction I expected. When she called me back, her voice had an urgency that made me sit on the edge of the bed. Beatrice, this is even worse than we imagined. They're not just planning to steal your property. They're orchestrating a complex scheme involving document fraud, signature forgery, and what appears to be a plan to legally incapacitate you. Legally incapacitate? To force a psychiatric evaluation that declares you mentally incompetent. With that declaration, they would have total legal power over your assets and your person. The room seemed to spin around me. And the health incident Brenda mentioned? Grace was silent for a moment. Too long. I prefer not to speculate. But Beatrice, you need to know that you are in real danger, not just financial. At that moment, I heard the familiar sound of Rob's car coming up the dirt road. They're coming, I whispered into the phone. Act normal. Don't show that you know anything. And Beatrice, if anything happens, if you feel in physical danger, call 911 immediately. I quickly hung up and hid the cell phone under the mattress. When Rob and Brenda came in, I was in the kitchen, pretending to prepare dinner. Hi, Mom, Rob said, but his voice had a different tone. Colder, more final. We came for your answer about the documents. What documents? Brenda rolled her eyes. Don't start that charade again, Bee. The transfer documents, you have to sign. What if I refuse? Rob approached, and for the first time, I noticed how different he had become in recent weeks. Thinner, with deep, dark circles under his eyes, his hands trembling slightly. He was nervous, desperate. Mom, you have no choice. Look around you. You live alone, isolated. Who will take care of you when something happens? Who will believe a confused old woman against two respectable citizens? Maybe I should talk to Pastor Williams, I suggested casually. Or with Sheriff Johnson. They've known me for decades. The reaction was instantaneous. Rob and Brenda exchanged a look of pure panic. No, Brenda said quickly. There's no need to involve other people. This is a family matter. Why not? Because, Rob searched for the words, because it would be embarrassing. For all of us. Imagine what people will think when they find out you're having mental difficulties. That phrase gave me an idea, both terrible and brilliant. You've already spread this, haven't you? You're already telling people I'm senile. The silence that followed confirmed my suspicion. That's why Martha didn't want to receive me. That's why Mrs. Peterson was so cold to me. You're setting the stage. We're protecting you, Brenda insisted, but her words sounded empty. And protecting your reputation, lying about me. Preparing people for reality, Rob corrected. For what you're becoming. Preparing people for reality, Rob corrected. For what you're becoming. The casual cruelty of those words cut me deeper than any scream. They were systematically destroying my identity, my reputation, my support network, and making it sound like charity. I will never sign these documents. Rob stood up abruptly. Then we'll have to do this the hard way. What hard way? On Monday, you'll have a doctor's appointment. Dr. Harrison will do a complete evaluation. If he determines that you are no longer competent to make decisions. Dr. Harrison? I interrupted. He's not my doctor. He is now, Brenda said with a smile that chilled me to the bone. Dr. Parker retired, remember? Dr. Harrison is the new doctor in town, a specialist in geriatric issues. The realization hit me like lightning. They had planned everything, found a compliant doctor, spread rumors about my mental health, isolated me from my friends. It was a perfect coup. What if I refused to go to the doctor? Then two people very concerned about the well-being of an elderly relative will have to request a compulsory evaluation, Rob explained. It's a standard legal procedure when there are concerns about someone's mental capacity. They left soon after, leaving me alone with the magnitude of what I was facing. It was no longer just theft. It was a legalized kidnapping of my identity, my autonomy, my life. But they had made a crucial mistake. They assumed I would passively surrender, that I would accept the fate they had chosen for me. They didn't know the Beatrice Caldwell who had survived the Great Depression, who had raised a son alone, who had kept a farm running for decades. I called Grace as soon as they left. Grace, they scheduled a psychiatric evaluation for Monday. With a doctor, I don't know. That's the standard, Grace explained. They find a professional who will give them the report they need. Beatrice, you need to know that if you are declared mentally incompetent, you will lose all legal rights. They will be able to do whatever they want with you and your assets. Then we have to act before Monday. Agreed. And I have an idea, but it will require a lot of courage on your part. Tell me, Sunday is the Harvest Festival, right? The whole town will be there? Yes. What if, instead of waiting for them to believe your words against theirs, you showed the evidence publicly, in front of everyone? The idea took my breath away. You want me to expose everything? In public? The idea took my breath away. You want me to expose everything? In public? Beatrice, they're counting on your silence, on your shame, on your isolation. But what if you turned the tables? What if, instead of being the silent victim, you became the voice that cannot be ignored? I spent the entire night thinking about Grace's proposal. It was risky. It was terrible. It would be the complete exposure of my family, of my pain, before the entire community I called home. But it would also be the only chance to prevent other elders from going through what I was going through. The only way to ensure that Rob and Brenda couldn't do this to anyone else. On Saturday morning, I called Grace with my decision. I'm going to do it. I'm going to expose everything at the festival. Are you sure? I am, but I'll need your help. You'll have it. And Beatrice? Yes? You are the bravest woman I have ever met. You'll have it. And Beatrice? Yes? You are the bravest woman I have ever met. I hung up the phone and looked out the window at the golden fields of my farm. In less than 24 hours, I would be standing before all of Harmony Creek, bearing my soul and fighting for my life. The country girl who had married George on this very land, who had raised a son and built an honest life, was about to transform into something I never imagined I could be. A warrior. The Harvest Festival would be my last battle, and I had no intention of losing. Saturday dawned with a sky full of gray clouds, as if the weather itself sensed the storm that was coming. I woke up at 4 a.m, not because I wanted to, but because my body refused to relax. Tomorrow would be the Harvest Festival. Tomorrow would be the day I put everything on the line. Grace had called me the night before with the final details of the plan. She would be at the festival, accompanied by Daniel Brooks, a private investigator specializing in financial crimes against the elderly. They would position themselves strategically in the crowd, ready to act when I gave the signal. Beatrice, Grace had explained to me, you will only have one chance. The element of surprise is crucial. They cannot suspect what you are planning. The ironic thing was that, to execute the plan, I would need Rob and Brenda's involuntary help. They always took me to the festival, always insisted on accompanying me. Another form of control disguised as care. This year, that insistence would be their own trap. I spent Saturday preparing like an actress before the performance of her life. I reviewed every photographed document, every piece of evidence collected. Grace had taught me how to organize everything on my cell phone, creating a rudimentary slide presentation that I could show to any authority present. I also practiced my speech. It was strange to rehearse the words that would destroy my family, but I rehearsed them nonetheless. In the bathroom mirror, before the gray-haired woman I barely recognized, I repeated the phrases that would change everything. My name is Beatrice Caldwell. I am 73 years old, and my own son is trying to kill me. The words came out more easily with each repetition, gaining strength, gaining conviction. At 3 in the afternoon, Rob called. His voice sounded strangely cheerful. Mom, we'll pick you up tomorrow at 10 for the festival. Brenda is eager to show her pie in the contest. That's good, I replied, forcing enthusiasm into my voice. I can't wait. That's good, I replied, forcing enthusiasm into my voice. I can't wait. And Mom, after the festival, I'd like us to talk about Monday's appointment. It's important for you to understand that we're doing this because we love you. That word, love, coming from his mouth, made me feel physical disgust. Of course, dear, we'll talk. When I hung up, my hands were trembling, not from fear, but from a rage so pure it seemed to illuminate my blood. How dared he speak of love while planning my destruction? That night, I sat on the porch for the last time as the innocent Beatrice Caldwell. Tomorrow, I would be a different woman, stronger, more dangerous, more determined, but also lonelier. Exposing Rob and Brenda meant accepting that I would never have family again, that I would die alone. The October wind blew through the trees, making the leaves whisper like voices from the past. I imagined George sitting beside me, as we used to do on autumn nights. Am I doing the right thing? I asked the wind. The answer came in the form of an owl hooting in the oak tree, the same owl that Grace had used as inspiration for my code name, Prairie Owl 47. Silent, but always watching, always vigilant. I slept poorly, but I slept. And when I woke up on Sunday, I was a different woman. I put on my best dress, the navy blue one George always said, made me look like a queen. I put on my pearl earrings, the ones my mother gave me on my wedding day. I styled my gray hair in an elegant bun. If I was going to war, I would be dressed for victory. Rob and Brenda arrived promptly at 10, as promised. Brenda carried her famous apple pie covered with an embroidered cloth. Rob wore his best suit, the forced smile I now recognized as pure pretense. Wow, Mom, you look elegant, Brenda commented, but there was something in her eyes that made me suspicious. Any special occasion? The festival is always special, I replied. And who knows, maybe it's my last. They laughed, thinking I was making a joke about my age. If only they knew how literal I was being. The drive to the city center was filled with small talk. Rob talked about the weather. Brenda commented on the festival decorations. I just watched the familiar landscape pass by the window, silently bidding farewell to a life that was about to end. When we arrived at the center, the main square was bustling with activity. Colorful flags fluttered in the wind, food stalls exuded tempting aromas, and a small country orchestra tuned their instruments on the main stage. It was exactly like all previous years, except this one would be different from all others. Grace was there, as promised. She wore a discreet red dress and casually chatted with Daniel Brooks near the lemonade stand. Our eyes met for a brief moment, and she gave an almost imperceptible nod. Everything was ready. Let's find a place to sit, Brenda suggested, guiding me towards the chairs near the stage. You'll have an excellent view of the speeches. Ah, yes, the speeches. Every year, Mayor Arthur Sterling gave the opening speech, talking about prosperity, community, and family values. This year, he would talk about these things while I, in the audience, carried evidence that he himself was involved in the scheme that destroyed families. Because Grace had discovered something else in the last 24 hours. something that made everything even more sinister. Dr. Harrison, who was supposed to evaluate me on Monday, was not just a compliant doctor. He was Mayor Sterling's brother. And the companies that were buying land from the elderly at paltry prices had direct ties to the Sterling family's businesses. It wasn't just a family scheme. It was a conspiracy involving Harmony Creek's highest authorities. Mayor Sterling took the stage at 11:15 promptly. He was an imposing man with well-combed gray hair and a perfect political smile. He began his speech as always, talking about tradition, family, and the importance of protecting the most vulnerable in the community. "Our elders are our treasures," he declared, his voice amplified by the loudspeakers. "They built this community with their hands, their hearts, their wisdom. It is our sacred duty to protect them, honor them, ensure they have the dignified old age they deserve." The hypocrisy turned my stomach. There was the man who profited from the exploitation of the elderly, talking about protection and dignity. I looked at Rob and Brenda beside me. They applauded politely, their faces perfect masks of civic approval. To any outside observer, we were a normal, respectable, united family. In 15 minutes, that illusion would be destroyed forever. The mayor was reaching the climax of his speech when I discreetly stood up. "I'm going to the restroom," I murmured to Brenda. "Do you want me to come with you?" she offered, always controlling. "No need, dear. I'll be right back." "Do you want me to come with you?" she offered, always controlling. "No need, dear. I'll be right back." I walked slowly towards the sound system, where a young technician was adjusting the equipment. Grace had taught me exactly what to do. The wireless microphone she gave me was hidden in my pocket. I just needed to connect it to the main system when the technician was distracted. "Excuse me," I said to the young man. "Could you help me? I think I dropped my earring here." While he bent down to look for the non-existent earring, I quickly connected Grace's device to the system. When he stood up, I was already walking away. "Sorry, it must have rolled somewhere else," I said. "Thank you anyway." I returned to my seat, my heart pounding like a war drum. Mayor Sterling was concluding his speech. May Harmony Creek continue to be an example of how a community should care for its members, especially the most vulnerable. May our harvest be abundant, and may our families remain united. The audience applauded enthusiastically. Rob gave me a side hug. "Nice speech, wasn't it, Mom?" "Beautiful," I agreed, discreetly testing the microphone in my pocket, especially the part about protecting the vulnerable. And then, as Mayor Sterling paused for the final applause, I pressed the microphone button. My voice echoed through the loudspeakers, clear and firm. "Excuse me, my name is Beatrice Caldwell. I'm 73 years old, and I need to talk to you about the truth behind these beautiful words." The silence that followed was absolute. Hundreds of faces turned in my direction. Rob and Brenda looked at me with growing horror. Mayor Sterling on stage was as pale as paper. Mayor Sterling on stage was as pale as paper, and I, Beatrice Caldwell, at 73, was about to begin the most important battle of my life. The storm had arrived, and I was the hurricane itself. The silence that followed my first words was so profound that I could hear my own heart beating. Hundreds of pairs of eyes were fixed on me, some confused, others curious, many embarrassed. Harmony Creek was not accustomed to interruptions at its public events. Rob stood up abruptly beside me. "Mom, what are you doing?" he whispered urgently, trying to pull me down to sit, but I remained standing, the microphone firm in my hand. At 73, for the first time in my life, I had the full attention of my community, and I would not waste this opportunity. "I apologize for the interruption," I continued, my voice now firmer, "but there's something you need to know. Something about how our families can become our greatest predators." A low murmur began to spread through the crowd. Mayor Sterling, still on stage, tried to regain control. "Mrs. Caldwell, perhaps this is not the appropriate moment for—" "This is exactly the appropriate moment," I interrupted, my voice cutting through the air like a blade. "Because you, Mayor Sterling, are talking about protecting the elderly while profiting from our exploitation." The murmur turned into a buzz. Brenda grabbed my arm. "Bea, you're humiliating yourself. Stop this." But I pulled away from her and took a step forward so everyone could see me clearly. "My son, Robert Miller," I said, pointing at him, "and his wife, Brenda Hayes, have spent the last 2 years systematically robbing me. They forged my signature, opened accounts in my name, and took out a life insurance policy speculating on my death. The buzz turned into exclamations of shock. Rob was livid, his fists clenched. "She's lying. My mother is sick. She doesn't know what she's saying." "I know exactly what I'm saying," I retorted, pulling my cell phone from my pocket, "and I have proof." Grace had taught me how to connect my cell phone to the town square's sound system. With surprisingly steady fingers, I projected the first image, the bank statement from the account I didn't know. "This is a bank account in my name, opened without my knowledge. Look at the transactions, $50,000 transferred 3 days before I received this statement." The crowd stirred. People stood up to get a better look at the projection. "That proves nothing," Rob shouted. "She's confused. She doesn't understand her own finances." I moved to the next image, the life insurance policy. "This is a $500,000 life insurance policy, taken out in my name, without my knowledge. The beneficiaries are my son and daughter-in-law. The policy was taken out 6 months after my husband's death." The silence that followed was broken by a voice in the crowd. "My God, B." It was Martha Henderson, my old friend, who stood up from her chair. "Is that why they told me you were getting senile? So I wouldn't believe you if you came to me?" Martha's revelation was like a spark in gunpowder. Other voices rose. Martha's revelation was like a spark in gunpowder. Other voices rose. "They told me too that B was having mental problems. My husband mentioned that Rob was worried about her health. They were setting the stage," someone shouted. Brenda tried one last desperate move. "She's delusional. Look at her state. A 73-year-old woman, alone, imagining conspiracies." But I was already displaying the next piece of evidence, the detailed plan to sell the farm. "This is their plan to liquidate my property. Look at the dates, the values, the subdivision of the land. They plan to declare me mentally incompetent on Monday through a forged medical evaluation." Mayor Sterling, who had tried to discreetly descend from the stage, stopped halfway down the steps. I pointed at him. "And you, Mayor Sterling, are directly involved. The doctor who was supposed to evaluate me is your brother. The companies buying land from the elderly are linked to your businesses." Now it was the mayor's turn to turn pale. This is slander. "It's the truth," I shouted, my voice echoing throughout the entire square. "And how many of you know other elderly people who sold their properties for low prices? How many moved suddenly to nursing homes? How many were declared incompetent by doctors they barely knew?" The silence that followed was different. It was the silence of people making connections, remembering suspicious cases, recognizing patterns. "Mrs. Gable," a voice in the crowd said. "Mr. Peterson," another said. "The Morrison family," a third added. It was as if a dam had broken. People began to share cases, suspicions, stories they had accepted as normal, but which now seemed suspicious. Rob, desperate, made his last attempt. "She's crazy. Look what she's doing. What normal mother would expose her own son like this? This proves she's not well." His words hit me like a punch, but they also gave me the final strength I needed. "What normal mother would do this?" I repeated, my voice now trembling with emotion. "A mother betrayed by her own blood. A mother who discovered that the son she trusted her whole life was waiting for her death to profit. A mother who prefers to die with dignity than to live as a prisoner." The tears finally came, but they didn't diminish me. They strengthened me. I worked my whole life on this land. I raised this man with love, dedication, sacrifice, and he repaid me with betrayal, theft, and a plan to destroy me. If that makes me crazy, then let me be crazy, but I will not die in silence. The crowd was completely silent now, hanging on every word. The crowd was completely silent now, hanging on every word. How many of you have elderly parents? How many of you will be elderly one day? How many of you want to live in fear that your own family will exploit you? This is not just my fight. It is the fight of all of us. It was then that Grace and Daniel moved. I saw them in the crowd, approaching Rob and Brenda with badges in hand. "Robert Miller and Brenda Hayes," Grace said, her voice clear and authoritative. "You are being detained for questioning regarding financial fraud, elder exploitation, and document forgery." Rob tried to run. For a pathetic moment, my 45-year-old son tried to flee through the crowd like a mischievous child, but the very community he had tried to deceive stopped him. Neighbors, friends, People who had known him since childhood formed a human barrier. "You're not going anywhere," someone shouted. "Arrest them," another shouted. "You're not going anywhere," someone shouted. "Arrest them," another shouted. Brenda, seeing there was no escape, launched into a final personal attack. "You're destroying a family. A bitter old woman is ruining the lives of good people." But Martha Henderson, the woman they had tried to convince that I was senile, approached Brenda with a fury I had never seen. "Good people?" Martha said, her voice cutting. "Good people don't rob their own mothers. Good people don't take out life insurance speculating on the death of those who raised them." The crowd erupted in applause. For the first time in months, I felt truly supported. Daniel Brooks, the investigator, was handcuffing Rob when my son looked me in the eyes one last time. There was no regret there, only anger and resentment. "You destroyed your own family," he said. "You destroyed your own family," he said. "No," I replied, my voice steady despite the tears. "You destroyed it. I just refused to die in silence." As they were led away, Mayor Sterling tried to discreetly escape, but Daniel Brooks was prepared for that too. "Mayor Sterling, you also need to come with us for some clarification." The mayor's arrest in the middle of the Harvest Festival was the climax no one expected. The crowd watched in respectful silence as the authorities did their work. When everything finally calmed down, I was still standing in the same spot, holding the microphone, looking at the faces of my community. Some cried, others applauded discreetly. Many simply looked at me with a mixture of admiration and pity. Grace approached and gently took the microphone from my hands. Grace approached and gently took the microphone from my hands. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, "you have just witnessed one of the most extraordinary acts of courage I have ever seen. Beatrice Caldwell risked everything, her privacy, her family, her reputation, to expose an injustice that affects our entire society." The crowd applauded, but the applause sounded distant to me. The adrenaline was wearing off, and I finally felt the weight of what I had done. I had won, but the price of victory was the loss of everything I thought was my family. Martha Henderson approached and hugged me tightly. "You were very brave, Bea, very brave." But as she hugged me, I looked at the road where the police car was taking Rob and Brenda, my son, my daughter-in-law, my family. Justice had triumphed, but the pain of a betrayed mother, that pain I knew would take much longer to heal. The 2024 Harvest Festival would go down in Harmony Creek's history. Not for the pies and musical performances, but as the day a 73-year-old woman stood up against corruption and proved that truth, however painful, is always worth defending. The silence on the farm was different now. It was no longer the familiar silence I had cherished for decades, but a strange emptiness, as if the walls were still echoing the events of the festival. I woke up before dawn, as always, but this time I couldn't find peace in my morning coffee. Yesterday, I had been a hero. Today, I was a mother who had sent her own son to jail. The media had descended on Harmony Creek like vultures. News vans from 3 states parked in the main square overnight. My phone, which Rob had fixed on Monday morning, rang incessantly with interview requests. The farmer who exposed the scheme, as the newspapers were calling me, was apparently a national story. Grace arrived at 8 in the morning, bringing coffee and croissants from the town bakery. She looked exhausted, but satisfied. "How are you feeling?" she asked, sitting at the kitchen table. "Like a traitor," I answered honestly, "and like a hero, and like an idiot, all at the same time." Grace nodded with understanding. "It's normal. You did the right thing, but that doesn't make it easier. Will the arrests lead to anything? Will the arrests lead to anything? Rob and Brenda have been formally charged with fraud, document forgery, and elder exploitation. With the evidence you collected, the case is solid. They will likely face 5 to 10 years in prison." The information hit me like a punch to the gut. 10 years. Rob would be 55 when he got out, Brenda 52. Their lives effectively ruined. And Mayor Sterling? That's more complicated. He has expensive lawyers and connections, but Daniel discovered more. The scheme is much bigger than we imagined. Grace opened a thick folder and spread documents across the table. "Beatrice, you didn't just expose a family crime. You uncovered a corruption network that spans 3 counties. Sterling and his accomplices stole over $2 million from the elderly in the last 5 years. $2 million. The number was so large I couldn't process it. How many people? $2 million. The number was so large I couldn't process it. How many people? At least 23 families we've identified so far, probably more. I looked out the window at the golden fields of my farm. How many other fields? How many other homes? How many other lives had been destroyed by the same scheme that almost destroyed me? They're going to sue me, I said. More of a statement than a question. Rob and Brenda? They'll probably try. Defamation, perhaps. But with the evidence we have, any lawsuit will be more of an admission of guilt than a defense. I don't care about lawsuits. I hesitated, trying to find the right words. About having to live the rest of my life, knowing I destroyed my family. Grace leaned forward, her eyes fixed on mine. Beatrice, you didn't destroy your family. Your family destroyed itself when it decided to exploit you. You just refused to be a silent victim. The words were logical, but the heart doesn't follow logic. The heart just aches. Around noon, I received an unexpected visit. A tall, distinguished man in a dark suit parked a black sedan in my driveway. My first thought was that he was another journalist, but something in his demeanor alerted me. He walked to the porch with the confidence of someone accustomed to being obeyed. When he knocked on the door, the sound was firm, authoritative. Mrs. Caldwell? My name is Thomas Hartwell. I'm a lawyer. Whose lawyer? Of some individuals who were affected by yesterday's events. I didn't like the euphemistic tone. If you represent my son, I have nothing to say. I didn't like the euphemistic tone. If you represent my son, I have nothing to say. I don't represent your son, he said, his smile not reaching his eyes. I represent broader interests. Grace had taught me to be cautious with unexpected visitors. What kind of interests? Mrs. Caldwell, what happened yesterday was unfortunate. Many people were harmed. Reputations were damaged. Businesses were affected. Criminal businesses, I corrected. He ignored my remark. I'm here to make an offer, a very generous offer. He took an envelope from the inside pocket of his jacket. $1.5 million in exchange for a public statement that you were confused yesterday, that your accusations were the result of misunderstandings and age-related health issues. I looked at the envelope as if it were a snake. Are you offering me money to discredit myself? I'm offering a solution that benefits everyone. You get rich, Harmony Creek returns to normal, and certain complications disappear. What if I refuse? His smile turned cold. Mrs. Caldwell, you are an elderly woman living alone on an isolated farm. Accidents happen. Health problems arise. Sometimes people simply disappear. The threat was veiled, but crystal clear. I felt a shiver run down my spine. I understand, I said, keeping my voice steady. You can leave the envelope on the table. I'll consider the offer. He smiled, thinking he had won. Wise decision, Mrs. Caldwell. You have until noon tomorrow to make your final decision. As soon as he left, I called Grace and Daniel. They arrived in less than 20 minutes, and I recounted every word of the conversation. They're desperate, Daniel said. Sterling must have powerful connections that are pushing to suppress the case. The good news is they just committed another crime, Grace added. Attempted bribery and threat. Did you record the conversation? I didn't think of it. No problem. Next time he shows up, we'll be ready. Next time, Grace and Daniel exchanged a meaningful glance. Beatrice, you need to understand. You didn't just expose a local scheme. You threatened very powerful interests. They won't just give up. What are you saying? I'm saying you need protection. For a while, at least. The idea of needing protection in my own home revolted me. For how long? Until everyone involved is prosecuted and convicted, or until they find a way to resolve the situation. That night, Grace and Daniel installed a basic security system on the farm. Cameras, motion sensors, alarms. My peaceful home became a fortress. I can't live like this, I told Grace, as she explained how to operate the system. It's temporary, Beatrice, I promise. But as I tested the alarms and checked the cameras, I couldn't help but think, what kind of victory was this that turned me into a prisoner of my own courage? That night, sitting on the porch with the security system active, I watched the stars and mentally conversed with George. Did I do the right thing? I asked the wind. The answer didn't come from the stars or the whisper of the trees. It came from my own heart, in a voice that sounded surprisingly like George's. You always do the right thing, Bea, even when it hurts. And it hurt. It hurt like childbirth, like loss, like all the necessary pains of life. But it was a clean, honest pain, a pain that built instead of destroyed. The bribery envelope was still on the kitchen table, untouched. $1.5 million to buy my silence, my dignity, my truth. I picked up the envelope and threw it into the fireplace. The flames quickly consumed the paper and the promise of dirty money. "I'm not for sale," I said to the crackling fire. Never was. Tomorrow would be another day of battle. But tonight, I was a free woman, a woman who had chosen truth over comfort, justice over peace. And that, I discovered, was worth more than any $1 million. The deadline from the lawyer in the dark suit expired at noon. At 11:45, I was sitting on the porch with Grace and Daniel, waiting. The security system they had installed showed 3 cars approaching the farm in formation, as if they were a military operation. "They came prepared this time," Daniel murmured, checking his recording equipment. "They came prepared this time," Daniel murmured, checking his recording equipment. The same Thomas Hartwell got out of the front car, but now he was accompanied by 2 burly men who clearly weren't lawyers. From the second car emerged an elegant woman with a briefcase and an older man I recognized immediately. It was Samuel Sterling, the mayor's older brother, known as the most influential businessman in 3 counties. "The cavalry has arrived," Grace whispered. Hartwell climbed the porch steps with the same arrogant confidence as yesterday, but this time his eyes were colder, more determined. "Mrs. Caldwell," he said, not even bothering to greet Grace or Daniel. "I hope you have considered our generous offer." "I have," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "And the answer is no." His smile vanished. "What a shame. A very imprudent decision." His smile vanished. "What a shame. A very imprudent decision." Samuel Sterling approached. He was an imposing man, the kind who was used to getting what he wanted through intimidation. "Mrs. Caldwell," his voice was deep and authoritative, "you don't understand the forces you are dealing with. What you did on Sunday affected far more people than you imagine." "It affected criminals," I retorted, "and I don't care how many." The elegant woman opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "We have medical documents here," she said. "Psychiatric evaluations that attest to your mental instability. Witnesses who will swear that you have been showing signs of dementia for months." My blood ran cold. "Fake documents." "Legal documents," Hartwell corrected. "Signed by reputable professionals. Enough to question your mental competence and invalidate any testimony you might give." Grace stood up. "This is a blatant attempt to obstruct justice. This is the protection of a community against the fantasies of a senile woman," Samuel Sterling retorted. Daniel discreetly activated his recorder. "What if she refuses to sign a retraction?" "Then," said one of the burly men, "we'll have to take measures to protect her from herself." The threat was clear. They would take me by force, commit me based on the false documents, and keep me sedated and silenced for as long as necessary. "You can't just kidnap me," I said. But even as I spoke, I realized how naive that sounded. "It's not kidnapping when it's done out of legitimate medical concern," the elegant woman explained. "Especially when an elderly person poses a danger to themselves and others." Samuel Sterling took a step forward. "Mrs. Caldwell, you have 5 minutes to make a sensible decision. You can walk away from this rich and respected, or you can walk away as a senile woman who will be forgotten in an institution." I looked at Grace and Daniel. They were tense, ready to act, but there were only 3 of us against 5, and they had legal documents, however falsified they might be. It was then that I heard the sound of several cars coming up the road. Daniel smiled. "Our cavalry has arrived." 3 police cars and an unmarked car stopped at the farm entrance. From the unmarked car emerged a tall man in a blue suit with a federal badge. "Special Agent Michael Torres, FBI," he announced, climbing the porch steps. "Gentlemen, I'm going to ask you to remain where you are." Samuel Sterling paled. "Agent Torres, there's some misunderstanding. We're just..." Samuel Sterling paled. "Agent Torres, there's some misunderstanding. We're just visiting a federal witness to intimidate her," Torres interrupted. "Yes, I know. We have recordings of your conversation yesterday, courtesy of Ms. O'Connell here." Grace had explained to me the night before that she had contacted federal authorities as soon as the case revealed interstate connections. Apparently, the FBI had been investigating elder exploitation networks for months. "Agent Torres, Hartwell tried to interject. My clients are just concerned about the well-being of an elderly relative. Your clients, Torres said, consulting a file, are being investigated for a criminal operation that spans 3 states. And now they can add witness intimidation and attempted kidnapping to the charges. The transformation on the group's faces was instantaneous. Arrogance dissolved, replaced by thinly disguised panic. This is absurd, Samuel Sterling exploded. I'm a respectable businessman. My family built half of this region. Your family also stole from half of this region, Torres retorted. We have documents showing fraudulent property transfers dating back 15 years. Daniel approached me. How are you feeling? Like a woman who just discovered she's not as alone as she thought, I replied. As the federal agents arrested the group, Samuel Sterling gave me a look of pure hatred. You don't know what you just did, old woman. You have no idea how many people you're going to harm. Harm? I repeated. I prevented you from harming more people. Torres approached me after they were taken away. Mrs. Caldwell, I'd like to explain what we've discovered in the last 48 hours. We sat in the living room, and Torres opened a thick file. The network you exposed is much larger than we imagined. They operated in 3 states with dozens of accomplices. Doctors who provided false reports, lawyers who facilitated fraudulent transfers, public officials who approved forged documents. How many victims? So far, we've identified 47 confirmed cases. There are probably more. The total amount stolen exceeds $5 million. $5 million. The number was so large I couldn't fully process it. Most victims don't even know they've been robbed, Torres continued. Many are institutionalized, medicated, with no contact with the outside world. Others simply disappeared. Disappeared? Grace gently touched my arm. Some died under suspicious circumstances shortly after transferring their properties. The implication hit me like lightning. They killed people? The implication hit me like a training. They killed people? We are investigating, Torres said carefully. But there are at least 4 deaths that require closer examination. I suddenly felt nauseous. What if I hadn't found out? You would have been next, Daniel said simply. The health incident Brenda planned would likely have been fatal. I spent the rest of the afternoon giving a detailed statement to the federal agents. Every document I had photographed, every conversation I had overheard, every suspicion I had developed, everything became part of a federal case that would change the lives of dozens of people. When we were finally alone, Grace and I sat on the porch to watch the sunset. How are you processing all of this? She asked. I'm still trying to understand that that Rob was willing to kill me for money. It wasn't just about the money, Beatrice. It was about the lifestyle they thought they deserved. For some people, greed becomes a disease. And Brenda? Brenda was the mastermind, not the follower. We discovered she had done this before with her first husband. He died in an accident 2 years before she met Rob. The revelation took my breath away. She killed her first husband? We're investigating, but the patterns are very similar. I looked at the golden fields of my farm, now protected by security cameras and alarm systems. It was strange to think that this peaceful place had been the center of a national criminal operation. Grace, how many people like me are out there? People being robbed, manipulated, who don't even know what's happening. Many, she admitted. More than we'd like to imagine. And what can we do? Many, she admitted. More than we'd like to imagine. And what can we do? Grace smiled. What you're already doing. Speaking out, exposing, showing that victims can fight back. That night, alone on the protected farm, I thought of all the people who had been victims of the same network that almost destroyed me. People who weren't lucky enough to find a suspicious bank statement, or brave enough to question their own family, or fortunate enough to find Grace O'Connell. People who died believing they were loved while being systematically stripped of everything. My victory had a bittersweet taste. I had saved myself, but how many others hadn't? I looked at the stars and made a silent promise. I wouldn't stop here. Somehow, I would find a way to use my experience to help others, to be the voice they needed when they couldn't find their own. The network was unraveling, but there was much work ahead. And I, Beatrice Caldwell, at 73, was just getting started. The county courthouse seemed larger and more intimidating than I remembered from the few times I had been there for farm-related matters. This time, I wasn't there as an ordinary citizen handling paperwork. I was the key witness in a case that had shaken 3 states. Grace accompanied me, wearing her best professional suit, carrying 2 thick folders of evidence. "Remember," she said as we climbed the marble steps, "you just need to tell the truth. They will try to confuse you, intimidate you, make you seem unstable. But the truth is stronger than any defense tactic." The courtroom was packed. Journalists occupied the front rows, disguised cameras capturing every movement. At the defense table, Rob and Brenda sat beside their lawyers, avoiding my gaze. Rob seemed to have aged 10 years in 2 weeks. Brenda, on the other hand, maintained an expression of disdain, as if she were the victim of a great injustice. Judge Harrison, ironically no relation to the Dr. Harrison who was supposed to evaluate me, was an elderly man with completely white hair and penetrating blue eyes. He had a reputation for being fair, but strict. "The prosecution may call its first witness," he said. "I call Beatrice Caldwell," announced the prosecutor, a young and determined man named James Parker. I walked to the witness stand with trembling legs, but my head held high. As I placed my right hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth, I felt George beside me, giving me strength. Prosecutor Parker began gently, asking me to tell my story from the beginning. I spoke about discovering the bank statement, the investigation in the barn, the life insurance policy. Every word was supported by evidence projected onto a large screen for the jury to see. "Mrs. Caldwell," Parker said, "at any point did you feel your life was in danger?" "Yes," I replied firmly, "especially after I found their plan and the note about a health incident. I understood that they weren't just planning to rob me, they were planning to kill me." A murmur ran through the room. Rob shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "And what did you feel when you discovered that your own son was involved in this scheme?" The question caught me off guard. Tears came before I could control them. The question caught me off guard. Tears came before I could control them. "I felt as if a part of me had died," I said. My voice choked. "You raise a child, love them unconditionally, sacrifice your own life for their well-being, and then you discover that they are willing to end your life for money. There's no word to describe that pain." I looked directly at Rob when I said this. For a moment, I saw a flicker of the boy I had raised, but he quickly looked away. When it was time for cross-examination, Rob's lawyer, an elegant man named Morrison, stood up with a confident smile. "Mrs. Caldwell," he began, his voice condescending, "you are 73 years old, correct?" "Correct. And you have lived alone for 9 years since your husband's death?" "Yes." "Have you ever had episodes of mental confusion, forgetfulness, difficulty processing complex information?" Grace had prepared me for this. "Like anyone my age, I sometimes have small lapses, but my mind is perfectly clear." "Perfectly clear?" Morrison repeated, flipping through his papers. "You didn't forget your son's birthday last year?" "I didn't forget. I chose not to celebrate because I had discovered he was robbing me. But Rob and Brenda told family and friends that you were forgetting important dates." "They lied," I interrupted, "just as they lied about many other things." Morrison tried another approach. "Mrs. Caldwell, is it possible that you misunderstood Rob and Brenda's actions? That they were genuinely trying to help you manage your finances? Is it possible," I said, "that taking out a life insurance policy, speculating on my death, is help? Many children take out life insurance for their elderly parents. Many children take out life insurance for their elderly parents, without the parents' knowledge or consent, and with such high values, and coinciding with plans to declare me mentally incompetent." Morrison was losing ground and knew it. He made his last attempt. "Mrs. Caldwell, don't you think exposing your own family publicly was excessive? That you could have resolved this privately?" The question made me stand up. "Excessive? Do you know what's excessive? A son who takes out life insurance on his own mother hoping she dies? Excessive is forging documents to rob a 73-year-old woman. Excessive is planning a health incident to get rid of someone who raised you with love." My voice echoed through the courtroom. The jury was completely attentive. My voice echoed through the courtroom. The jury was completely attentive. Would we resolve it privately? How? By being declared insane and forcibly committed? By dying in a convenient accident? No, Mr. Morrison. When your own family plans your death, there's no private conversation that can solve that. The lawyer recoiled, clearly not expecting such passion in the response. "No further questions," he murmured. Prosecutor Parker stood up for redirect. "Mrs. Caldwell, if you could go back in time, would you do anything differently?" "Yes," I replied without hesitation. "I would have exposed everything much sooner. How many other people could have been saved if I had acted earlier?" When I stepped down from the stand, I felt I had fought the most important battle of my life, not just for myself, but for all the silenced, exploited, forgotten elderly. The trial continued for 3 days. Other witnesses spoke: FBI agents, other elderly victims of the network, financial fraud experts. Each testimony strengthened the case against Rob, Brenda, and their accomplices. Grace testified about the sophistication of the scheme. Daniel Brooks presented evidence of the operation's national extent. Even Martha Henderson took the stand to talk about how Rob and Brenda had systematically planted doubts about my mental sanity in the community. The most difficult moment was when Rob finally testified in his own defense. He tried to present himself as a concerned son who only wanted to protect a mother who was losing her mental faculties. "I love my mother," he said, his words sounding empty in the silent courtroom. "Everything I did was for her well-being." But when Prosecutor Parker confronted him with the evidence, the forged documents, the insurance policy, the farm liquidation plan, Rob began to contradict himself, his story unraveling piece by piece. Brenda, for her part, refused to testify, maintaining an irritatingly superior expression throughout the trial. On the last day, during closing arguments, Prosecutor Parker addressed the jury directly. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you have heard a story that should shock the conscience of any decent person. A 73-year-old woman, a widow, living peacefully on her farm, was systematically betrayed by the people she trusted most. It wasn't just theft. It was a betrayal so deep, so calculated, that it included speculating on her death." He pointed to Rob and Brenda. The defendants not only stole money, they stole the dignity, security, and almost the life of Beatrice Caldwell. And if she hadn't had the extraordinary courage to defend herself, you would never have heard this story, because she would be dead. Defense lawyer Morrison made one last desperate attempt, claiming everything was a misunderstanding and that Rob and Brenda were victims of circumstances. But his words sounded weak against the weight of the evidence. The jury's deliberation lasted only 4 hours. "Guilty," the foreman announced, "on all counts." Rob collapsed in his chair, finally understanding the magnitude of what he had lost. Brenda maintained her mask of disdain, but I saw her hands trembling. Judge Harrison was severe in his sentencing. The defendants exploited the most sacred trust that exists, that between parents and children. "Robert Miller, you are sentenced to 12 years in prison. Brenda Hayes, as the mastermind of the scheme, you are sentenced to 15 years. When they led Rob away in handcuffs, he looked into my eyes one last time. There was no anger there now, only a deep emptiness. It was as if he finally understood what he had lost, not just freedom, but the mother who had loved him unconditionally. "Mom," he began, but I looked away. Some bridges once burned cannot be rebuilt. Winter came early to Harmony Creek that year, covering my farm with a blanket of snow that transformed everything into a silent postcard. 2 months had passed since the trial, and I was still learning to live with the consequences of my victory. The farm was different now. The security cameras Grace had installed still worked, although the immediate danger had passed with the arrests. What had truly changed was the silence. Not the peaceful silence I had always loved, but the silence of complete solitude. Rob and Brenda were in state prison 200 miles away. I hadn't visited them. There were no letters. There was no reconciliation. Some wounds are too deep to heal, and some betrayals too great to forgive. But the isolation had brought an unexpected discovery. I wasn't truly alone. Grace had become more than my lawyer. She was my closest friend. She came to the farm at least twice a week, sometimes to discuss legal aspects of related cases. The federal investigation had expanded into a national operation, but mostly just to talk. "How are you coping with everything?" she asked one December afternoon, as we drank hot tea in the kitchen warmed by the fireplace. "Some days are harder than others," I admitted. "There are moments when I miss, not the Rob who betrayed me, but the boy I raised. It's strange to grieve for someone who is still alive." Grace nodded understandingly. "It's a unique kind of loss. You lost not only your son, but the illusion of who you thought he was. Exactly. And I wonder, where did I go wrong? How did I raise someone capable of doing this? Beatrice, you didn't raise a monster. You raised a person who made terrible choices. There's a difference. The letters arrived daily now, hundreds of them, from all over the country, from people who had read about my story in newspapers or seen it on the news. Elderly people going through similar situations, families who suspected exploitation, lawyers asking for advice on similar cases. Each letter was a reminder that my experience had touched something greater than my own pain. One particular letter deeply affected me. It was from a woman named Dorothy Martinez, 78, from Arizona. Dear Beatrice, I read your story in the newspaper and cried for 3 days. Not because I felt sorry for you, but because I finally found courage. My son and his wife are doing exactly the same thing yours did. I knew, but I was afraid to speak. After reading about your courage, I called the Elder Support Center number. They are helping me. You saved my life without even knowing me. It was this kind of letter that made me realize the pain had been worth it. Daniel Brooks, the investigator, had also become a regular visitor. He kept me informed about the progress of the federal investigation and about the other cases that had emerged from the exposure of the network. 43 people have been arrested so far, he told me during one of his visits, in 7 states. The total amount recovered already exceeds $8 million. And the victims? Some, like you, managed to recover everything. Others, well, for some it's too late, but most are being compensated. The most surprising aspect of it all was how the Harmony Creek community reacted. Initially, it had been divided. Some people supported me. Others thought I had gone too far by publicly exposing my own family. But when the federal arrests began and the true extent of the scheme became known, even the most skeptical changed their minds. Mayor Sterling and his brother Samuel had been pillars of the community for decades. Discovering that they were behind a national criminal operation shook Harmony Creek to its foundations. The city needed to rebuild, and somehow, I became a symbol of that reconstruction. Pastor Williams came to visit me on a particularly cold December afternoon. He was a kind man who had known our family for decades. Beatrice, he said, holding a cup of coffee with trembling hands, I want you to know that the entire church is praying for you. Praying for what? For healing, for peace, for you to find a way to move forward. Pastor, I replied, I've already moved forward. What happened to me didn't define me. It strengthened me. He smiled. I can see that, and I want to make you a proposal. What kind of proposal? The church is organizing a support program for the elderly. We want to create a group where people like you can share experiences, offer mutual support, identify signs of exploitation. We would like you to lead the group. The idea intrigued me. Why me? The idea intrigued me. Why me? Because you did something most people wouldn't have the courage to do. You stood up, and there are many people who need to learn how to do that. I thought about the proposal for days. Leading a group would mean regularly talking about my experience, reliving the pain, continuously exposing myself. But it would also mean transforming my tragedy into something useful. The following week, I called Pastor Williams. I accept, I said, but with one condition. What is it? The group won't just be for victims. We want entire families, adult children who are genuinely concerned about elderly parents, grandchildren who want to learn how to protect grandparents. We want to build bridges, not just heal wounds. Perfect idea. The first meeting of the family support group took place in the church hall on a January evening. We expected perhaps 10 people. 37 showed up. There were elderly people who suspected they were being exploited, adult children genuinely concerned about vulnerable parents, grandchildren wanting to learn warning signs, and even some professionals, lawyers, doctors, social workers, who wanted to better understand the problem. My name is Beatrice Caldwell, I began, and I'm going to tell you the most painful story of my life. Not because I like to suffer, but because I believe that our worst experiences can become our greatest contributions. I spoke for an hour. When I finished, the silence was absolute. Then, a woman in the third row raised her hand. My name is Sarah, she said, her voice trembling. And I think my brother is doing to our mother exactly what your son did to you. And so it began. One by one, people shared their stories, their suspicions, their fears. What started as a support group transformed into a community protection network. Grace, who had come to support me at the first meeting, was impressed. Beatrice, "You've created something special here." "I didn't create anything," I replied. "I just offered a safe space for people to speak. The courage was always there. They just needed permission to use it." That night, driving back to the farm under a starry sky, I felt a peace I hadn't experienced in months. The pain of betrayal was still there. It always would be. But it was being transformed into something greater, something useful. George always said that the deepest scars often become our strongest points. I was beginning to understand what he meant. My farm was still silent that night, but it was no longer a silence of isolation. It was the silence of someone who had found peace with herself, purpose in her pain, and strength in her vulnerability. Healing had begun. Not just for me, but for an entire community that was learning that talking about family exploitation was not a shame. It was an act of courage. And courage, I discovered, is contagious. The first anniversary of the Harvest Festival that changed my life arrived with golden leaves dancing in the October wind. Harmony Creek decided to dedicate this year's festival to elder protection and dignity, a tribute that left me simultaneously honored and embarrassed. I was on the same porch where it all began, watching the preparations in the distant town, when Grace arrived with a pile of letters and an expression I had learned to recognize. She had important news. "Beatrice," she said, sitting beside me on the swing George had built decades ago, "I need to tell you about some incredible things that are happening. Good or bad?" "Definitely good." "Remember your support group?" "Good or bad?" "Definitely good." "Remember your support group?" How could I forget? What started as a weekly church meeting had grown into something much bigger. Now we had meetings in 3 different churches, a 24-hour hotline operated by trained volunteers, and even a home visit program for isolated elderly people. "What about it?" Grace smiled. "The Harmony Creek model is being replicated in 42 cities in 12 states. The FBI wants to use it as an official elder exploitation prevention program." The information left me speechless for a moment. 42 cities? And growing. Your story, Beatrice, has become a national catalyst. People who would never have spoken are finding the courage to report. Families who would never have united are creating protection networks. She showed me some of the letters. They were from public prosecutors, social workers, other elderly people who had created similar groups in their communities. All cited my story as inspiration. One particular letter caught my attention. It was from a young lawyer in Chicago. "Mrs. Caldwell, my name is Jennifer Liu. After reading about your case, I changed my specialization to elder law. I just opened an office dedicated exclusively to cases of family exploitation. In 6 months, we have already helped 23 families. All cite your courage as what gave them the strength to act. You didn't just save your own life, you saved hundreds." "Grace," I said, my voice choked. "I never imagined that something so painful could generate so much good. That's how it works sometimes. The greatest tragedies can become the greatest forces for change." That afternoon, I received an unexpected visit. An official car stopped at the farm entrance, and from it emerged an elegant woman I recognized immediately. It was Senator Patricia Walsh, a nationally known advocate for elder rights. "Mrs. Caldwell," she said, climbing the porch steps, "it's an honor to meet you personally." "Senator Walsh, what a surprise." "I came personally because I have a proposal to make. We are drafting federal legislation, the Elder Protection Act of 2025. We would like to officially name it the Beatrice Caldwell Act." I was completely surprised. I don't know what to say. "The law will create national standards for investigating family exploitation, establish mandatory protocols for medical evaluations of mental competence, and create a federal fund for community support groups like the one you started here." Grace was beaming. "Beatrice, this means your work will be institutionalized. It will be permanent protection for future generations. But there's one condition," the senator continued. "We would like you to testify before Congress when we present the bill. Your voice, your story, would be the most powerful testimony we could have." The idea of speaking before Congress terrified and inspired me at the same time. "When?" "Next month, in Washington." That night, sitting alone on the farm, I thought about the extraordinary journey my life had taken. A year ago, I was a 73-year-old widow living peacefully on a farm, systematically robbed by my own son. Today, I was being invited to testify before Congress about a law that would bear my name. The phone rang, interrupting my reflections. It was a number I didn't recognize. The phone rang, interrupting my reflections. It was a number I didn't recognize. "Mrs. Caldwell?" a young voice said. "My name is Michael. I'm Mrs. Dorothy Martinez's grandson from Arizona. Do you remember her?" I remembered immediately. Dorothy was the woman who had written to me after reading my story, finding the courage to report her own son. "Of course I remember. How is she?" "Well, very well. Her case is going to trial next month, and she recovered almost everything that was stolen. But she passed away last week." My heart sank. "I'm so sorry." "No need to be," Michael said, his voice surprisingly cheerful. "She died happy. In her last words, she asked me to call you and thank you. She said you gave her back her dignity in the last months of her life." When I hung up, I cried, not from sadness, but from a strange mixture of pain and joy. Dorothy had found justice before she passed. Her last life experience had been one of victory, not victimization. The next day, I began preparing for Washington. I wrote and rewrote my testimony a dozen times. How do you summarize an experience that changed not only your life, but potentially the lives of millions of other elderly people? Grace helped me refine the words, but the essence came from the heart. Congressmen and women, my name is Beatrice Caldwell. I am 74 years old, and a year ago I discovered that my own son was planning my death to steal my inheritance. I am here today not to tell my story of victimization, but to speak about transformation, about how the worst experiences of our lives can become catalysts for extraordinary change. The speech continued for 10 pages, detailing not only my experience, but the hundreds of cases that had emerged since then, the support groups that had spread across the country, the lives that had been saved. Elder exploitation by family members is a silent epidemic. It happens behind closed doors, protected by the victim's shame and society's misplaced trust. But when we create safe spaces for people to speak, when we remove the stigma of family reporting, when we offer real legal protections, lives are saved. The testimony before Congress was broadcast live on TV. I spoke for 45 minutes to a packed room of congressmen, journalists, and lawyers. When I finished, I received a standing ovation that lasted 2 full minutes. The Beatrice Caldwell Act was unanimously approved in both houses of Congress. The president signed it in December at a White House ceremony, to which I was invited as a guest of honor. When I returned to Harmony Creek, I found my farm decorated with banners saying, "Welcome home, our local hero." The community had gathered on my porch, neighbors, friends, members of the support group, even some people I barely knew. Martha Henderson, now 83, but still strong as an oak, gave a speech. Beatrice Caldwell has always been special to us, but what she did in the last year, well, she proved that one person can change the world. She transformed her pain into protection for others, her shame into courage, her tragedy into hope. That night, when everyone had left, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea and looked at the stars. George always said that people are judged not by what happens to them, but by what they do with what happens to them. My family had betrayed me in the worst possible way. My son had speculated on my death. My daughter-in-law had planned my murder. I had lost the illusion that blood means loyalty, that raising children guarantees unconditional love. But I had gained something more, the certainty that I am stronger than I imagined, more resilient than I believed, more capable of making a difference than I dreamed. The farm was still silent that night, but it was a different silence. It was not the silence of loneliness or fear. It was the silence of hard-won peace, of a mission accomplished, of a life well lived. At 74, I had become a warrior, a defender, a voice for those who cannot speak. And I discovered that this version of myself, forged in pain, tempered in courage, refined in compassion, was who I always should have been. George would be proud. Rob and Brenda were still in prison, serving their sentences. I didn't visit them, didn't write letters, didn't keep in touch. Some wounds are too deep for complete healing, but I had learned that forgiveness does not mean reconciliation. It means freeing oneself from the weight of resentment. I had forgiven them, not for them, but for myself, so that I could use my energy to build instead of destroy, to protect instead of seek revenge. The last letter I read that night was from a 16-year-old girl. The last letter I read that night was from a 16-year-old girl. "Mrs. Caldwell, my name is Emma. My grandmother read your story and told me about it. She said that when I grow up and she gets old, she wants me to be brave like you if I need to protect her. She said you proved that getting old doesn't mean becoming helpless. Thank you for teaching me that women can be warriors at any age. I smiled reading that letter. That was it. That was the greatest victory. Not just protecting today's elderly, but teaching future generations that dignity has no expiration date, that courage does not diminish with age, that the voice of a determined person can echo through time. It was then that I understood that the story of the farmer who unmasked the scheme had ended, but the legend of the warrior who changed the world was just beginning.